Good morning, everybody. This is John Spiokla from GAI Insights. Great to be here to review the news with our team. And today, we're sponsored by CustomGPT.ai, a fantastic growing company that helps you build your own chatbots in a secure and easy manner. It's so easy to do. I've got one for my book. It's just fun and not very expensive. And you can do a number of projects in the cloud. So thanks for CustomGPT.ai. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our host, David DeLallo.
All right. Thank you, John. This should be an interesting discussion today. We've got a couple of key announcements from our friends at Mistral. We have a product preview by the GOAT of the bunch, Google. And we have an article by three people that the viewers might know very well that we'll talk about as well. So
you have to be careful to not use the term GOAT because it has a double.
That's right, greatest of all time. I know. As I said it, I told you I'm tired. I was at a concert last night. I was like, that might not be the right term to say, but you get the drift. Okay, so Ankaj, kick us off. Where's your screen? There we go.
Yes, thanks, David. So, David, why don't you start with this one?
Okay, so yes, we published an article yesterday on HBR about a method that we propose for how you can integrate AI effectively into your organization. And we basically posed that, it's different than previous technologies. So it should be integrated a little differently than technologies. And I'll pass it over to John to give a little more information, and we'll chat about it a bit.
Yeah, sure. So the core idea is that, for the past, 150 years, we've been automating by taking things out of people, out of animals, and putting it into machines, and largely a one-way notion. And that's true of almost all automation. And in this, we say, no, this is really about a dialogue. And in order to do that, traditional ways of doing business process reengineering and so forth are insufficient. So we suggest really understanding first how to break things down into subtasks and decide when should the machine lead and when should the human lead, and how does that work? Second, to really have a ongoing group of folks in terms of thinking about what the nature of the dialogue is over time. So really a working group and feedback loops. And third, to continue to automate and to drive more and more increasing capability and operating scale. And in the article, we also detail out one case study in particular that went from having 50% roughly of their things, the customer service needs at getjerry.com dealt with over 200,000 a year that they dealt with within 24 hours to over 100% of them. And from 100% of the things being escalated to human beings to only about 6 or 8% being escalated to humans. So way more productive, customers are happier, employees are happier, the business can scale more. So it's very powerful. And they were able to use an approach like this to update their models on a regular basis and continue to chase excellence. So we think it's something important for executives to understand.
Did anyone have any reactions to it on our team?
Well, I have my biases. But yeah, it's a good article, and we've been talking about this on and off for a while. I think it's a good way to think about things, both from the perspective that it is more of an integrated team as opposed to we're going to cordon off this particular set of activities and automate it completely and hand it to a machine. And I think that's, the word synergy comes to mind, and I'm a little hesitant to use it, but that is the right kind of term. As long as you understand what these robots, these generative AI things are capable of, and keep them, quote unquote, in their place. But they are great amplifiers of our capability when used in this synergistic fashion and not just put off in a corner and said, hey, sort these things, which is what we usually think about machines doing. So I think that's a much better way to design going forward.
Yeah, and one of the things we talk about is kind of treating your teams become kind of a facilitator of this interaction between the humans and machines rather than creating some like a hard and fast process, and you put guardrails in place kind of for the interactions rather than saying, hey, we're just going to replace this particular task with the AI. I mean, that may happen in some cases, but largely it'll be kind of this dance. So we're going to read
the interesting thing is there's been lots of certainly anecdotal and even some researched evidence that having any kind of team or even single partner is actually generally an improvement in productivity. Pair programming is what comes to mind. It's still not used that widely, despite the fact that it's been shown over and over and over again to be extremely effective. And it'll be interesting to see. So here's a free product idea: create pair programming using generative AI. It's an obvious use case.
That's right. So I think we're going to selfishly rate this as essential reading for our viewers. But I think it really is. So
yeah, especially for the AI leader to think about how to go forward. Yep.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. We will end the self-indulgence here and move on to the next article. What do we have on, Kaj?
Okay, so the next one is a big one from Mistral AI. So they have launched a new model to rival GPT-4. The model's name is Mistral Large, and they have also launched an alternative to ChatGPT with the service called LeChat. And it is sort of following the same model as GPT-4 with an API based, with a paid API and a usage based pricing, and seems like it is performing just next to GPT-4 in all sort of evaluation parameters.
That's right. Adam, what do you think about this?
It was to be expected. It was a matter of time, but at the same time, I consider it absolutely essential. A little further down, it touches on the news about Microsoft, which I think we're going to defer and sort of give its own moment in the spotlight, the partnership there. But with other than that, though, I think the three key things here are that there's the Mistral Large, which is a model that's competitive now, as you can see there, with GPT-4, Claude 2, Llama 2. In one test, you see it's the ARC-C, which is another basic like multiple choice reasoning kind of test. It actually shows it as the leader, but you notice GPT-4 wasn't measured on that one. So they're, I think, trying to show that there isn't clearly one leader, but for the most part, there still is. I think the takeaway there is, as we've discussed before, business leaders need to be careful not to take a one-size-fits-all approach and really think about what's the best model for the solution, the use case, and really looking at a multi-model environment, right? The next thing is LeChat, which is a competitor to ChatGPT. And what's interesting there, and more specifically with the paid API access, that's Mistral moving a little bit away from their open source roots. And it makes sense at the same time because they do have to monetize, right? They need to compete, but they also need to survive, and they can't just keep getting more rounds of funding, especially if they aren't showing the money coming in. So it's a significant turn for them, and it's something to pay attention to. And it also means it's as important, if not more important than ever, for business leaders to think about business case and ROI, and really what are the costs of these models, because you aren't going to be able to get these things for free, like to the degree that you might have thought you could have before. So I'd say it's essential news, and there's a lot of really exciting points in there.
Yeah. Anybody else? Any thoughts? Otherwise,
I think I would actually agree it's essential, but I would sort of argue with you, Adam, in that I think they could raise as much money as they want. I don't think that's the issue at all here. I think it's just they've seen what OpenAI was capable of, and the money's on the table, they're going to take it. I think Mistral's the real deal. We'll find out over time, but these people, remember, you said from their open source roots of less than a year ago. This is a brand new company, and the speed with which they have gotten to where they are is astonishing. Remember, OpenAI's been at this for really 10 plus years to get where they are. These guys have been at it for 10 months. So it's astonishing how far they've gotten. And I absolutely think that they will have an important position in Europe. There may be others, but the European thing is real, as we've discussed before. I think that's a lot of the reason why Microsoft did the deal, both because they're showing themselves to be quite a player in terms of just the quality of what they're showing up with, their models and things. And also, I think Microsoft wants a foot in Europe that is not going to be a problem with the European politics.
And let's remember their founders are from DeepMind and Meta, right? So they're no strangers to the space either. But I think that's probably a nice segue to the Microsoft news. What do you think?
Yeah, one thing I would just note, actually two things I wanted to just point out on the article. One, on the negative side, the context window is still much slower on, smaller on the Mistral model at 32,000 tokens as compared to 28,000 for GPT-4. So, I mean, right there, you've got a little performance, a pretty significant performance gap in one area. But on the other hand, the 20% cheaper to run this compared to GPT-4. I mean, one of the things happening right now is, I think hearing companies kind of get sticker shock when they start running the models in production and seeing how expensive they are. So we've got one that's cheaper here. Obviously, there are others that are cheaper than GPT-4. And you anticipate some kind of race to the bottom, right? But right now, it's so expensive for these companies to actually run the models on their end, for the rest of us to use it, that you wonder how far down they can go. So I just think it'd be interesting to watch on that front. So it sounds like we're going essential, and we will move on to the next piece of this news.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. No.
Um,
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. So in continuation of the Mistral news, so Microsoft has now partnered with Mistral in its second deal beyond OpenAI.
All right, John, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. Well, my other analyst here, Agnes, thinks it's essential. No, I mean, this should be termed. My opinion on this thing is why I love Satya Nadella one more time. Okay, this is so genius. First of all, it makes them multimodal. Second of all, it gets them into the EU. What are the French? He puts the French in a perfect place. Are you going to start, hitting me with, constraints, or are you going to have your national champion, the only, one of only two European models at scale that are actually getting anywhere? So he puts the French regulators in a perfect spot. He gets access to the European market, in ways that he's not going to get with OpenAI. He gets a hedge against, the knuckleheads over at OpenAI that, threw Sam out and back in again and so forth. It's just perfect, and the clients get multimodal and, puts them on, and he sells it. It's just, and whether he came up with it or whomever, I think it's just genius. So
multi-model, you mean, right?
What's that?
Multi-model, you mean?
What did I say? Multimodal?
Yeah.
I meant multi-model. Yeah, sorry.
I think it's right on. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
gives them a little walk away power against OpenAI too, depending.
Yeah, all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's strategic thinking at the highest level and strategic execution. I just love it. I mean, whatever.
And on the other end, I mean, it gets them, kind of a little more diversified, right? So it gets the regulators off their back potentially a little bit right now. So it does.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, it puts the regulators in a wonderful bind, right? Because, before, if you was just coming to Europe with OpenAI, it's like, oh, those knuckleheads, forget that, put pressure on them, squeeze our locals a little bit. Now it's like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? What's the Adelph? What's the German model? Adelph Alpha? I'm trying to remember.
Aleph Alpha.
Aleph Alpha, yeah. So those are the only two at-scale European models.
Right.
So, you got Falcon out of the EU. I mean, out of the UAE. right? And other than that, it's American models and Chinese models. So what are the regulators going to do? Take their national champion and squish it down? Well, they can't.
Right.
I mean,
And
he's
it's
really
a great, I think it's a great deal for Mistral as well.
Oh
For
yeah,
the same reason it was a great deal for OpenAI.
yeah.
Microsoft, is still an enormous enterprise player everywhere in the world, including Europe especially. And they just did the same thing they've done in the US, which is they now have access to the entire enterprise market with the Microsoft sales channel and Microsoft's trusted, secure access to all their capabilities. So I think it's a brilliant move on both sides, to tell you the truth.
Yep. Well done. You can see what Google does.
Yeah. So are we going essential on this one?
Absolutely. I and Agnes both think so.
All right. I gave you control, Adam, because I think Ankaj was having a little bit of an issue. I think I gave you control. Maybe not. I don't know whoever's controlling the slides now. Go go ahead and introduce.
Yeah. So the next one is from Bria. So Bria's generative AI open platform is now helping companies produce visual content at scale.
All right. I forget. Who did I assign this? Oh, Tim. This was
Yeah.
you.
So this is optional in my opinion, but interesting. It's dare we already say yet another text to video generator. The interesting thing here is that they have been explicit about licensing all the training data from reputable sources like Getty Images, who's an investor. So their marketing is partly, hey, we're as good as Dolly 3 and Mid-Journey. However, we don't have any compromised training data. We have licensed data, and all the big guns are behind us. We'll see. I think this is an important issue, as we've said many times, the IP infringement potential and copyright potential. But we'll see. It's a small company with a small model. I find it hard to believe people aren't going to use Dolly 3 and Mid-Journey. Read Brian Arthur if you want to understand really why, but information economies tend to concentrate very rapidly. People like Mid-Journey, they like Dolly 3, they're reluctant to switch without a major precedent against them.
I am a testament to that. I am still using Mid-Journey heavily, even though, I would say the interface for Dolly is easier. However, I think they each have their pluses and minuses. But anyway, I'm definitely an example of your point. So what was your rating on this, Tim?
Optional.
Optional.
Interesting, but optional.
Okay.
Yeah, I would do optional as well. I think it's a press release. They make some claims in there, like the ability to have a deterministic outcome in these systems, which I don't believe. I hacked around with it a little bit, and the results aren't that great. And it's everything that Getty and the brand marketers want to have. It's being promised: control the brand, nothing bad. We're gonna absolutely transparent, clear. Training data, predictable outcome, great, okay. First of all, I don't think they can deliver it. Second of all, they're just started.
Okay, we will say optional. Next.
Okay, the next one is from FlowGPT. So FlowGPT is a new platform which gives the user option to select generative AI models like Google Gemini or Anthropic Claude, and also provides a chat interface to interact with those models.
Yeah, so I'll take this one. I'm borderline optional important, and I'll tell you why. I mean, first of all, I'm going to share my screen because one of the things that this article talks about is that the creators say, that they're working on having this be very responsible, etc., and that they're not allowing bad content. But I will show you that I went on there just to see what was going on here.
Don't get us in trouble, David. Come on.
What's that?
Don't get us in trouble. Come
No,
on.
no, don't worry. It's not X-rated by any means, but there's it's just instantly like the very first thing that shows up on the left, Chat GPT uncensored. Then you've got selfie girlfriend, which I looked up. What is that? And it's a it's a chat where you everything that you put in, it responds with like a different photo of this woman. So I would say that they're either being dishonest or they're really bad at what they're doing because that is certainly not the case that they're being responsible. I also I just thought it was funny that when they talked about the creator, his name is Jay Dang. They said, Berkeley dropout Jay Dang, and I was like, that's kind of unfair. Why would they focus on that? But then I went to his LinkedIn to see like what has this guy done, which isn't anything notable. And he literally puts on his LinkedIn that he's he's a dropout. So anyway, all of that actually now makes me want to say optional because I think this is a crappy a crappy delivery by an unnotable person. The reason I was leading important was just to note that kind of at this early stage, you've got the GPT store from OpenAI. Obviously, it's a closed system. You're only posting things created with OpenAI. Here, you're able to post. I mean, these are essentially prompts. It's not really apps, I would say, but post your apps and use like any model. So it's an open system, and I feel like at some point, like that type of system will develop, that type of store. I don't think, and I kind of hope that this isn't the one. But curious to hear what others feel about this.
Yeah, that's the only notable thing about it. It's again, we tend to start out, most industries tend to start out vertically integrated because it's too hard to do anything if you don't control the whole thing. And then they realize, oh, there's some benefit to controlling the whole thing because you have effectively a monopoly over your vertical stack if you're powerful enough. But the reality is that it's terrible for the consumer. Nobody remembers anymore, but in the old days, when the cell phones first came out, you couldn't call other cell phones if they weren't on your network. So if you had a Verizon phone in the United States, you couldn't call an AT&T phone, or in Europe, an Orange phone. And it took years and years and years and some regulation before that was all settled. So we see the same kind of thing here. And the obvious thing is to have a model, a prompt where you can send it to every model. And there are already routers and things coming into place. This thing is, obviously clickbait in my opinion. So, we can get as off color as you want, but clearly they're going for the, remember that everything that can produce an image can produce, Picasso and Monet and also pornography. And these guys, I think, are probably going to lean towards the pornography end. You're on mute, Dave. David, you're on mute.
I gotcha. Sorry about that. We'll go optional on this.
I was curious what Adam thought, because he's probably built more robots than any of us.
Good point. What do you think, Adam?
It's optional. I don't need to spend a lot of airtime on it. It allows you to connect to different models. There's no shortage of other tools out there that are already doing that. It doesn't need a lot of airtime, in my opinion.
All right, we're in
There you
agreement.
go.
Optional, but notable that a open ecosystem store may emerge elsewhere and consolidate, but it hasn't happened yet. Okay, last article for today.
Last one is from Google DeepMind. So they have launched Genie, which can instantly create playable games.
Okay, we'll go to John first, and then I want to go to Adam because
Sure. I rated this thing as important for the same reason that Adam brought up around Sora, which is that first, it's interesting that it's going to have a huge impact, I think, on the roughly $200 billion video game business, which is about the same size as the PC business globally. So that's a non-trivial impact, and your ability to generate new domains, taking 2D images and create games out of anything. But the thing I found the most interesting was later in the article, it talks about the ability to take these 2D images, create worlds, and then train robots with those. And I think that to me is really big in terms of getting to. They keep talking about it in the frame of AGI, general intelligence, but I don't think that's the right frame. I think it's about having functional worlds that we can then, with both real and synthetic input, that then can take things either in the physical world of the marketplace or the virtual world market space and put it together and train it, just like AlphaGo did and AlphaFold, training on synthetic data. So I think that is the interesting part, which was taught to me by our dear friend, Adam. So important.
All right. What do you think, Adam?
Yeah, I'd agree. I've put the link to the 1-minute clip from our discussion a couple of weeks ago where I was talking about this, and it's interesting to see that Sora didn't really speak to it, or OpenAI didn't speak to it at the time, but in this article they even Sora alluded to the fact that it was an important step towards AGI, but in this article they literally say, let's see if I can find it here. With Genie, our future AI agents can be trained in a never-ending curriculum of new generated worlds, right? And our AI agents, as John astutely said there, they're going to be robots, right? They're going to not just be figurative robots like chatbots, but physical robots that are generating the content they need to understand how to behave in the world around them without having necessarily already seen video of it. So it's an important development. It shows that Google's just matching pace with OpenAI in that space, and goodness, they have no shortage of training data when you think about the publicly available videos that are on YouTube, right? So there's a lot of opportunity there, and for that reason, it's important.
So why not essential? I will ask you both, because you've made some quite interesting arguments.
It's more the same. It's a step change. It's just showing another competitor in a space that's already emerging. There's nothing really that's a breakthrough here.
All right.
Yeah.
I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'll go. I would agree with important because of the rapidity with which the markets are moving and the ability to generate this level of video, even though it's early. I would actually argue that this is with the premise that this is going to help to a certain extent. It will help initially, but this is actually one of the biggest issues with the current state of this market, generative AI, which is that everybody assumes they can just generate data and everything will get better. In fact, the reality is it's a mathematical equation, folks. Things are going to get worse, much, much worse, because these are compression algorithms. And if you keep compressing the same algorithm and then using those compression algorithms to generate new data to compress, it's like trying to compress a picture over and over and over again. And as long as you are losing any information from one compression to the next, eventually you have nothing left. And that's the path we're on if we're not careful. This is the biggest problem with generative AI. You put Stack Overflow out of business, for instance, which is a coding site where people put tips on how to solve coding problems. Put them out of business, you're not going to generate Stack Overflow from generative AI. You're just going to get worse and worse and worse. And eventually nobody will be able to write any code at all. So it's a real problem. And I think you have to be careful about these assumptions. There's these just pie-eyed assumptions of these researchers and young kids, excuse me for saying young kids, young people, who just think technology will solve all these problems. Technology is almost always neutral, creates as many problems as it solves. And this one needs some attention because we will already something like 40%, they think 50% of the internet content is being generated. And if that continues at that pace, it's just going to get worse and worse.
But Tim, I hear you, and I don't know the math well enough to know for sure, but when you look at AlphaGo, right, and its ability to discover new kinds, just through synthetic data, new kinds of moves in Go that were novel and effective, my assumption was that you weren't having continual information loss in the context of that training.
Because, games are a special case. Games and sports are a special case. They're constructed worlds with very specific deterministic rules that you can write down in a reasonable size sheet of paper, if you will. That's not the world.
Yeah, but when you're constantly titrating in, let's just take YouTube, the example that Adam brought up, right? As training data. And let's say it is 40% machine generated. I'm still titrating in 60%. And
for for the moment. But remember, we went from 0 to 40% in a couple of years.
Yeah,
If
but
it keeps up at that rate, it'll be 99% in another couple of
I
years.
just don't have a good feel for how big that loss function is and how much external stuff, the exploration, the context of there's a lot of structure in the real world too, right? There's physics, there's roles, there's all kinds of stuff. And then there's
There is.
quasi-structure like language. When you titrate in new information into that context.
If you have new information, I agree. The thing is that if there's 0.00001% loss, that's all it takes because it's a compounding effect. If 99.999% of the data is generated, then that 0.0001% loss will mean everything is lost in just a few rounds.
But again, it's not clear. Loss implies a certain set of objective functions that in terms of the efficacy of what you're learning. So when you take a look at but I think what the LLMs have taught us is the microstructure of language actually is much more computable than we thought it was, even if it's opaque to us. So I'm just not there with you in terms of.
I think that's it. I think we're apples and oranges. We get have a longer discussion. You're arguing a completely different thing.
Okay,
I agree with you on that part.
I think we'll discuss how we can pick up this debate and have like a proper debate session over this topic. But great discussion overall today. People have some reading to do, but they're short articles, but they're essential. We've got our article on your paradigm for putting generative AI to work in your organization, a couple of Mistral announcements that you should dig into, and the Google DeepMind world generator is another to take a look at. So great discussion today, everybody. Thank you very much for watching, and we will see you tomorrow.
All righty. Thank you, David. And again, thanks customgpt.ai for sponsorship. Go out and try out the product. See you tomorrow.